Hey everybody, it's Christopher, aka the Bronze Age Nerd, and welcome to another video. I got my coffee set aside today. It's Sunday afternoon for me. My daughter's upstairs napping. This is the time I record a video for the week where I want to talk about topics that are a little bit more about the cerebral side of collecting, why we collect, what we collect for, those kinds of things. And the topic that's been at the forefront of my mind for a while now, and it seems like a lot of the community, is this sort of re-intensified topic about what constitutes a first appearance. So I don't know about you, but it just seems like I've been surrounded by intense conversations about this topic the last week or so. And I have my own thoughts on what is or isn't a first appearance. So do apps, so do gurus, so do grading companies. Ultimately, I believe what really matters is what we all want to believe for ourselves as collectors. But when you talk about the speculation or the investment side of comic books, obviously what most people think is going to matter for those reasons. So there's this sort of notion I see, this prevailing notion that I see over and over, that the market will decide. The market will decide what the key first appearance is, what the key book to collect is. To a certain extent, that's true. But you have to remember, the market can be manipulated. I mentioned earlier, we have forces at work here that are influencing the opinions of collectors like us. You could say to an extent that I'm one of those voices. Maybe I'm going to be influencing you. So that's something you need to keep in mind. But certainly sources with much bigger soapboxes have their opinions on these things, and they have those opinions for different reasons. Some of them are purely academic, and some of them are motivated by things like money or future investments. So if you will, follow along with me, and let's take a second to think about why first appearances are so important in comic collecting anyway. Why do we gravitate towards putting value on first appearances of characters? I think it almost entirely relates to the huge thing in collecting before comic books came along, and that was baseball cards. You could say sports cards, but primarily it was baseball cards. And people cared about rookie cards when it came to early baseball collecting. In fact, they still do today. And in sports cards collecting, baseball card collecting, they don't care about cameo. They don't care about full appearance. Now, it's a different medium. This isn't a one-to-one comparison, and I understand that, but I think for a thought experiment, it's kind of interesting. And also these days, there are plenty of players that have, several or really dozens of rookie cards. But back in the early days of the hobby, when you're talking about some of those early players from decades before comic book collecting was even really big, in the late 60s and 70s especially, a lot of those players only had one rookie card. And that's when collecting in that hobby was really established. So there was kind of one card to go after. And I think we're going to kind of draw inspiration from that for this conversation. At least in my mind, that's probably where this precedent was established. So to me, if you think about it, the first time a character appears in comic books, that's their comic book rookie card. And I definitely want to reiterate, every collector decides for themselves what appearance of a character matters the most to him. In a character like Wolverine, talking about the classic Hulk 180, 181 thing, we'll get to that in a second. Maybe some characters value 180 because it's the first time he appears, he says his name. Maybe some collectors value 181 because he's on the cover, it's his first fight. Wolverine's known as a fighter, that's his first fight, he appears throughout the issue. There's various arguments there for why you might like one over the other. That's totally fine. There are some collectors that are going to value Uncanny X-Men 133 because that's his first solo story. Or they might value Wolverine 1 limited series because that's his first self-titled issue. There's a lot of things you could go after for Wolverine keys. You could even say that their first appearance or their first type of story, cameo, full, all that kind of stuff isn't what's important. What's important is something that happens to them in their lives. For example, it's totally valid for you as a collector to say that I care about when Wolverine had his adamantium ripped out of his skeleton by Magneto. That's totally fine. No one's going to fault you for saying like that's the Wolverine issue you care about. Maybe it's the first Wolverine story you ever read in a comic book. Maybe that's what matters to you. There's all kinds of options. And as a collector, that's the beauty of comic book collecting. You get to decide. That's beautiful. Don't let anybody take that away from you. That said, as the kind of investment side of comic books is a big part of the hobby for a lot of collectors. It is for me. It is for many of the collectors I know out there. We collect our own personal collections, and I'm speaking generally here. We collect our own personal collections, but we also like to speculate. We like to invest in comic books because we have proven time and time again that comic books are worth money, or potentially are worth money at least. Depends on if we're talking about Turok 1 or not. But there are plenty of comic books out there that are worth money. And so people are going to care about this question. So maybe it's time that we recalibrate how we view first appearances. We've gotten so caught up in this Hulk 180, Hulk 181 dynamic. And I think there's a lot of things going for that conversation. And there's a lot of people that have already talked about it. So I don't really necessarily want to rehash it. In fact, I did a video on it already. But what I want to talk about here is, have we let that example, have we let that precedent get too in our heads when it comes to what matters about a first appearance? Comic books are, you know, the whole cameo idea as we understand it today in comic book collecting isn't necessarily maybe how that comic book term originated, but it's this idea of kind of teasing a character into a story and doing like a partial appearance, right? But if you know who that character is, if you can look at that panel and say, oh, that's that character, even later on, knowing more about that character, that's the first time they appear. I mean, you can call that the first full appearance, you can call it the first cameo appearance. That's all semantics, but if you know who that character is, then that's the first time they appear, right? So that's kind of the salient question in my mind that we need to ask ourselves. And if we do need to ask ourselves that, do we need to kind of maybe, you know, re-examine this through that lens of baseball card and sports card collecting, where that's the rookie appearance of that character. That's the rookie card of comic books. That is, in my mind, where this all came from. And I know that kind of subconsciously in the back of my head, that's kind of been driving me when I collect appearances of characters. I always think that's more important. Now, I generally try to collect both. If there's, let's say, for most characters that have a cameo appearance, let's say it's cameo in full is kind of the thing that people kind of gravitate towards. I try to get both. You know, a character like Apocalypse or something like that. I try to get X Factor 5 and 6, for example. I think that's a smart way to do it if you're collecting or investing in that character. I also want both early appearances as a collector. That's something I care about. You know, that's just a way that I collect, and you might choose differently. But I do think it's something that we need to re-examine. I can definitely understand the argument of like, hey, a shadow shouldn't be worth more than an actual physical appearance of a character. I get that. I think there's a good conversation to have there. But when you talk about a character appearing in a full panel, like it's happening in a lot of these modern comic books, you know, Hulk and Venom, the both current Hulk and Venom runs. Look at Hulk 3. You look at Venom 1 versus Venom 4 versus a potential future appearance of that character, Bedlam. We definitely are talking about some interesting stuff here that is obviously extremely current, and the market's kind of got this weird look at these two characters, and there's all this debate happening. People want to know what's the book to have. And in my opinion, if you're not talking about it purely from your perspective as a fan of the series and a fan of the character, which is up to you, then I think it's best to get both if you can. But at the same time, I think long term, there's a really good chance that people are going to look at this a little bit more logically and say, what is the first time that character appears? You know, there's this subjective thing here. If you look at Venom 1 and Venom 4 in particular, the character appears roughly the same both times. Maybe on a larger, you know, 2-page splash versus a 1-page splash, all that kind of stuff. But it's roughly a similar appearance. I don't know. I don't see why Venom 1 has to be worth less than Venom 4 automatically just because it's the cameo. What's the difference? Also, there's people saying like, oh, well, Venom 4 is just the second cameo anyway. Why? Why is that just a cameo? I don't understand that. And if it's just not, if Venom 4 is not a cameo, then why is Venom 1 a cameo? Food for thought. Questions that I would love to hear your opinions on in the comments section down below in this video. If you'd like to even have a longer conversation about that, another great place to do it is at my Discord. If you're not familiar with Discord, it's essentially a free chat program used a lot for like video games and now for communities to have sort of a pseudo private chat room type place to hang out. We talk about, you know, comic book hauls and comic book theories and collecting questions and, hey, what are some good LCSs? Where's a good place to order? Talk about news for comic books coming out, all that kind of stuff there. It's a great place to come hang out. We'd love to see you over there. And before I leave, I'd just like to talk to you about a couple discounts available to you as well. You can use the code BRONZE10 over at dangerouswaterscomics.com to save 10% off your order. And if you're looking for some comic supplies, you can head over to Gemini Comic Supply, and you can use my referral code in the link down below to become a customer over there. And I have a discount code to save you 5% over there as well. Last but not least, if you're looking for cleaning and pressing services, may I recommend Turlock Comics. They've done a fantastic job on some of my comic books, and you'll be seeing some of those come to the channel pretty soon. You can get comic books from any era, pressed and cleaned, for just $15 using the code BronzeNuts. Or you can send in 10 comic books and get them done for $12 a piece, which is a really good deal. Definitely check them out. I highly recommend them. Thanks a lot for following along for this topic, everybody. Hopefully it at least gets you thinking about it. That's the part I care about. I don't actually want to influence your opinion, but what I do want to do is encourage you to think about the issue for yourself and figure out what really matters to you. Have a great day, everybody. And as always, I want to remind you, hey. Read comics every day.